My name is Selene. Selene. Mysterious, numinous, and discreet, like drops of mist rising in a fog. I'm going to tell you my history, the history of a goddess, and you will soon understand why I no longer dwell upon the past, when primitive and uncouth men venerated me. Although the particulars of my tale happened millennia ago, the happy outcome is still with me to this very day, and feels as fresh and fragrant as a whiff of strawberries when they're first plucked. If you're having difficulty following this, be a little patient. Perhaps you'll find it easier if you just think of me as the moon. You should be grateful that you're hearing the story from me, a bona fide goddess. So, before I start, please, don't ask questions about the other gods and what it was like to be on Olympus and 1,000 other irrelevant gossipy inquiries. This is not their story, it is mine. It is an interesting tale, and only because I feel this uncharacteristic urge to talk about that which has up till now gone untold, will you have the good fortune of hearing it. My story begins in the depths of winter. I was at the peak of my strength, shining the lengthy hours from sundown to sun up, and was gazing nowhere and everywhere all at once. During the protracted night, I sometimes amuse myself by following the diverting, nocturnal comings and goings of mankind. As ridiculous and naive as human actions may be, they take themselves oh so seriously. The uproar coming from an obscure corner of Latmos that winter evening was most unexpected and attracted my lunar attention. There's no reason you should be familiar with Latmos. It's an inconsequential stony land with craggy hills that lies far away from the plains where civilized men live. The landscape is dotted with the leathery leaves of squill, and small stands of stunted oak is only suitable for sheep, goats, and the rough shepherds that watch over them. There's nothing to recommend this forlorn place. My realm is normally hushed, so the noise caught my attention. I cherish silence. There is something inexplicably beautiful and detached about it. Latmos is the last place one would expect a ruckus in the height of winter. Yet, there were strident shouts coming from an isolated wood that grew by a small stream, and I had difficulty discerning who was being so shrill. "It's my turn tonight," shouted one voice. "He liked me best," responded another. "Wait till he sees me," yelled a third. Focusing my gaze on the source of the hollering, I saw a clutch of young women, giggling, but with an underlying earnestness in their arguments and an occasional unladylike push and shove. Eventually, one of the women broke free of the group, flung a coarse fleece over her shoulders, and ran off before the others could stop her. She dashed wildly till she neared a band of shepherds, warming themselves around a campfire, and dropped down on all fours. I could have sworn she was pretending to be a wolf. The shepherds either didn't notice her approach or pretended they didn't. They were too busy listening to one of their troop. The wolf girl crouched nearby without stirring. The storyteller said, "You should have seen him. He was so large, you would have sworn he was a great monster and not a bear." And here the storyteller roared ferociously and beat his chest. "I caught sight of him from behind the oaks, sneaking up on the flock by the spring further on the valley like this." And now the fellow hunkered down and trudged menacingly between the shepherds, startling them all. "When the beast saw me, he reared up on his hind legs and roared, so that all the leaves began to quiver, as if they were shaken by a fierce north wind. I looked here and there for a weapon, but could find none. The fiend approached, long lines of spittle dripping down his filthy snout. Of course the shepherd was just bragging, telling a tall tale to impress his friends. It was delightful, and I couldn't but admire his abandon. His gestures, imitating the bear standing up, was so wild that his friends reared back in fear. He acted out all the parts: the bear, the terrified flock, and his own valiant self, running, swirling, jumping, and rolling on the ground. There was so much energy that I myself was swept up in the telling and imagined the fiendish, drooling brute standing there, right in front of me, waving its deadly claws and yowling wildly. It was so childishly entertaining, even charming. The storyteller, at first, looked no different than his companions. The same rough tunic hacked from crude cloth, the same hair never touched by a comb or brush, flecked with pieces of straw. I'm certain that had I gone up to him that evening, he would have reeked, like his friends, of the same foul odour of sheep urine. Nevertheless, he wasn't just an unformed clump of sod like the other shepherds. He had a visceral spark of earthy vitality. Even a goddess, perched far away in the sky, could sense it. As the story progressed, the wolf girl inched stealthily closer, and she took her cue just as the bear was about to attack the fearless shepherd, and from out of the shadows cast by the campfire, pounced on him with a most ravenous feminine growl. The shepherd disentangled himself from his attacker, struck a mock pose of courageousness, and then flew back at the wolf girl. They rolled over each other. The shepherd first on top, then the wolf girl, with her legs wrapped around the hips of her quarry. A fierce struggle which gave them ample opportunity to straddle each other and claw at the layers of cloth that hung loosely on their bodies. She laughed joyfully and snapped at him, while the shepherd slithered over and under her lithe body, allowing her to nip him every once in a while. Then, together, they trundled off unseen behind a clump of myrtle bushes, where their peals of laughter gave way to moans and sighs. I found it very embarrassing and uncultured. I imagine the other gods think I'm something of a prig. I don't particularly like the reputation, but it doesn't concern me, certainly not coming from them. You would think all they do all day long is scheme up novel ways to fornicate. They make seduction seem so puerile, and heaven help if they fail to make their miserable conquests. Their rants and raves would make a 2-year-old blush. Sometimes I even feel uncomfortable in their company, thinking they might have me too in their incestuous sights. Yes, that can and occasionally does happen in Olympus, so I keep clear of them as much as I can. I find this obsessiveness distasteful, and their being so preoccupied with fornication predisposes me against the whole subject. I wish they would conduct themselves with more maturity and not ruin it for everyone else. Getting back to the story. While the shepherd and wolf girl were tussling, the troop of women struggled up to the campfire and joined the shepherds, gawking in envy at the trembling in the midst of the bushes. The women were clearly fantasizing jealously what it would be like to be in their friend's place. The shepherds just leered. "That Endymion has it holds, commented one. So that was his name, Endymion. I left them to their romp, but could not forget them. How brazen that girl was to pounce on Endymion in full sight of all the shepherds, and then to let him toss her about, while she shamelessly laughed at the onlookers as one article of clothing after another was torn away. Long after leaving the campfire on that secluded glen in Latmos, I can still see the trickle of blood on Endymion's arm as the wolf girl dug in her nails with frenzied ecstasy at his embrace. The curve of the bloody slashes across his arms reminded me of the arc of breaking waves. The next night, the shouts from Latmos repeated themselves, and since I was so pleasantly entertained the previous evening, I decided to observe the festivity again. This time I think it was a different wolf girl who broke from the pack, though it was difficult to tell for certain, since they all looked so similar, just like geese within a gaggle. There was the same half-playful, half-serious jockeying among the maidens, and accusations were roundly hurled at the fortunate lass of the previous evening. Not 2 nights in a row? And what makes you think you're so special? And you're not getting in tonight. In the midst of all this finger-pointing, one girl took advantage of all the squabbling, slyly took hold of the wolf cloak, and sauntered away, without anyone paying any attention. After distancing herself a few paces, she broke into a wild dash, and was so far removed from her friends before they noticed and could do anything about it. Bravo for her. Next time they should be more vigilant. It was pathetic how simple-minded those girls were. Once again, Endymion had his rustic audience huddled round a blazing campfire in the thrall of another outrageous tale. He seemed larger than the previous evening, as if he'd sprouted some extra inches. His voice, too, was more sonorous. It was deep and full, and felt as if it could embrace you in its timbre. The 2 wolves were now lying dead at my feet. I was bleeding from my calf, where one of the brutes had bitten me when I was breaking the neck of his friend. I didn't even feel it at the time, and only noticed when I saw the pool of blood at my feet. I began walking towards the spring to wash off the wound, when this great booming voice called, "Well done, Endymion! Good job!" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "Who's speaking?" I shouted out, turning round, not knowing where to aim my cry. "I am Apollo!" the voice bellowed. Here, all the shepherds imperceptibly cringed in fear. Endymion paused, ever so slightly. I saw he elicited the reaction he was aiming for. "You think I fell down all a-trembling? Pardon me, Lord Apollo, but I have this wound to attend to, so let's have this conversation another time." And I continued on my way. "Endymion!" he calls out. "Yes, Lord," I responded, a little impatiently, to tell you the truth. "Look down at your leg!" And would you believe it? It's fresh and clean as the way it was when I woke up that very morning. The group of shepherds hardly had time to gasp before the new wolf girl sprung from the myrtles, growling a high-pitched growl, and pounced on Endymion. Grabbing her around the waist, he called out to his friends, "Another wolf! I think they're attracted to me." But the girl wouldn't desist, broke free of his hold and jumped on his back. She held him tightly, tighter than one would imagine from so slight a female, and clung to him with all 4 limbs. Her growls sounded more like pants. Endymion casually strode around the campfire, as if there wasn't a woman on his back groping him. "Wolves are obstinate, aren't they?" he called to his fellows, and one of the shepherds called back, "Show us how you treat them." He took hold of the grunting girl in a single arm to the accompaniment of his cheering friends and marched triumphantly off to the myrtles. At this point, I forced myself to avert my eyes and not to follow them to beyond the bushes where they did their dirty deed. Imagine the cheek, Apollo speaking to a human for something as trivial as a fight with wolves. It's simply ludicrous. How the shepherds let themselves be so taken in is beyond belief. It is as if they begged Endymion to dupe them with so fanciful a lie. Yet there was cunning in that Endymion. He knew that none of his audience would question the tale, that at the end of the evening they would only get down on their knees and plead for more. As the yarn got more and more implausible, he seemed to grow in stature, relishing the adulation of his spectators. I will admit, he no longer seemed like the other shepherds. He towered above them, toyed with them as if they were little children. He could have told them anything, and they would have believed it. Endymion looked different this evening, or maybe I was just paying more attention. His nose a little crooked. There is a small beak in it, and it seems to slant ever so slightly off to the side. I imagine he wasn't born that way, but it is the product of some violence in his rough lifestyle. His brow is strong, and I can envisage the firm musculature that underlies the deep furrows that traverse his forehead. It's a well-shaped forehead, not too prominent or receding. There's a small cleft in his upper lip, which I found quite alluring. The next night, I waited for the spat coming from the wood in Latmos. It seemed to take a long time, and I wondered if something had happened during the wet day. But in the end, the women did not disappoint. The cackling was the same as in the previous evenings, and I could feel some compassion for the silly women going through the same ritual evening after evening. "Well, you had him last night," squawked one. "And you had him 2 nights ago," the other shrilly responded. "But I've never gone up to him," whined a third. But she sounded so pitiful, I doubt any of her sisters paid her the least bit of attention. After all, this was a fight in earnest, and the weak have no hope in succeeding by exposing their own feebleness. Finally, a woman who'd kept her silence during the squabble strode with determination to the cloak and took hold of it. She was tinier than the others, but when they tried to block her way, she struck at them ferociously with her fists and legs, which left them stunned. Even I thought it might have been excessive, but when you want something so badly. Confronted with such resolve, the women stopped trying to obstruct her, and she walked slowly and deliberately to the campfire. Only when she was a few paces from the men did she crouch down on all fours and cover her shoulders with the wool fleece. Endymion had just started his story, and the shepherds sat around him listening in rapture. "I was out with my flock last spring, and we were grazing on the near slopes, when I saw at a distance a woman walking by herself along one of the goat paths. You could tell she wasn't from around here. Her tunic was silken and dyed light brown, and an embroidered yellow shawl was wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was the same shade as her tunic, and she had a hairband made of gems that sparkled in the sun. At that distance, I couldn't see her face, but with that get-up, who cares?" At this point, all the shepherds chuckled their prerequisite obscene laughter of approval. "She looked my way, and I waved. She turned and waved back, so I motioned that she should come over. When I finally saw her face, let me tell you, she didn't disappoint. 'Hello,' I said, all casual-like. 'Hello,' replied, and stood there without moving. "Can't cool your tongue?" I asked. But she still said nothing, so I took a hand and said, "You sit here, next to me." We sat down, this close to each other on a big boulder. "What brings you to Latmos? You're not from round here, are you?"
"I'm from Heraclea. My father is the leading wool merchant in town. He left to trade at Halicarnassus today. He always keeps me secluded at home, and while he went away, I decided to go for a stroll. I love the countryside, but he never lets me out."
"Oh, well, you should be careful. There's many wild animals in these hills."
"Oh, really? I'm so frightened."
She inched a little bit closer, so I put my arm round her, and she nestled right under my shoulder like this.
And here Endymion stopped and waited for the inevitable question.
"So what did you do?" one of the shepherds called out on cue. "You want to know?" And at that point, he broke from the circle of friends and away from the campfire. He pushed aside some bushes and seized the wolf girl who was lying in the grass, transfixed by his story and immobile to react. Carrying her in his arms, he returned to his friends and said, "Let me show you." At first, you could see the girl was uncomfortable being made a spectacle of in front of the randy audience. But as Endymion began caressing her, she lost more and more of her unease and willingly gave in to the bewitchment of his hands and lips. She would have assented to anything Endymion had wanted. But he had the decency to tell the shepherds that the show was over and dragged her to behind the bushes to consummate what should not be made public. I was enchanted by the story. Of course it was poppycock, but he told it as if it were the most natural thing in the world, like these sorts of things happen to him every day, that despite being just a shepherd, beautiful girls threw themselves at him. The shepherds believed it too, and so did the wolf girl, and yes, I, Selene, goddess of the moon, believe it too. Women should fall at his feet. Men should revere him. However, no man of rank would ever overcome his disdain of Endymion's lowly station, and great ladies would scoff at him. Only a goddess can disregard all question of status and accept him as the extraordinary being he truly is. I grasp too just how handsome he really is. We're all attracted to beauty, gods and mortals alike. This is the first thing that impresses us in a person, whether we acknowledge it or not. For this reason, lesser persons go to great lengths to look attractive. In his unassuming attire and rude environment, Endymion made no artificial attempt to prettify himself, but I saw clearly through the guise. His arms are well moulded and powerful. His chest is stout and broad. Throw a suit of armour over him, he would be more formidable than the most fearsome soldier. Drape him in purple, he would be a king. And so passed one night after another throughout the winter. Endymion's stories were magical throughout. Usually, they were about uncommon acts of valour and amorous conquests. Occasionally, they told how he outfoxed unscrupulous adversaries. The other shepherds crouched in the shadows of the campfire and enthusiastically devoured the exploits, regardless of how outlandish they in fact were. Every evening, a wolf girl crept up on him, and each time Endymion would affably weather the attack and dispatch the aggressor behind the myrtle bushes. The most successful stalker was the tigress from the third night. She was all thick matted hair, which dwarfed her shrewish head with its tiny black eyes. She was feral, no more domesticated than the wolf she pretended to be, and was so vicious in her battles to take possession of the fleece that after the first slash with her pointed fingernails, the other women prudently desisted and let her have her way. The most infuriating thing about her was that Endymion seemed to especially enjoy when she was the evening's attacker. When she was dragged off behind the myrtles, there were no whimpers coming from the bushes, but mad howls, and Endymion, who was normally quiet when he hauled his wolf girl away, would join her baying. I could find no reason how such a prince among men could demean himself with this thing who was only remotely a woman. She was repellent. I became more determined that such an outstanding man had to be elevated to his suitable stature. Fortunately, the seasons were on my side. In the winter, the shepherds take their flocks to graze and gather in the evenings around the campfire to warm themselves. By spring, the chill leaves the evenings, and already the sheep are kept in the shade of the pens during the warmer midday hours. As the days grow longer, the fire, though it remains a staple of the gatherings, becomes less and less necessary. By summertime, it's too hot to take the sheep and goats out during the day. The flocks are compelled to graze at night. As a result, each shepherd passes the evening by himself in his own foraging area. No longer would they have the opportunity to congregate around the fire and listen to Endymion's tales, nor would the wolf girls pursue their cherished prey. Summer was a time when each shepherd would be on his own. This is the season I awaited. Endymion would be mine alone. The first night he went out by himself, he took his flock along a meagre stream whose flow was already low during the dry summer months. At a bend in the brook, he led the goats and sheep up a gentle treeless slope and sat himself on a bare boulder. To me, Endymion was even more majestic on this solitary evening. In the darkness of my night, the beauty of the bold lines of his face glistened. He sat with back straight, not hunched over like a humble goat herd, but erect like a ruler perusing his realm. I was determined to replace his normal company with my divine self. When we were alone on the exposed hill, I made my first attempt to contact him. Moonshine is perceived differently by different people according to the disposition of the observer. Lovers feel a warm glow. The hunted feel it pursues them. Revellers stumble out of their drinking hall, look up at the moon, and are inspired to go back inside and have another round. This opinion of me is quite egocentric and misses the mark. As mistress of the night, I imbue moonshine with feeling and emotions that I alone control. When I had Endymion to myself, I permeated my shine with a sense of grandeur. I engulfed him with the cool glow of dignity befitting a goddess, with the intent to elevate and improve him. This would be my gift to Endymion, and I had every expectation that he would look up and acknowledge it. Throughout the evening, I discharged these rays, reserved specially for him. However, my Endymion continued to sit glumly on his boulder, surrounded by the sheep, ostensibly senseless to the singular shine he was privileged to receive. I thought I could sense a subliminal effect on him, a slight murmur of receptiveness. I hoped my light was planting a seed in him and would just need a night or two to sprout. The next evening, and the evening after that, though I infused my rays of grandeur with even more intensity, there was still no visible reaction. I was perplexed. I'm not embarrassed about what I'm about to say, but I admit The edification of Endymion was not my true goal. I craved him. I thought I'd wanted to love him like a god loves a man, but now was ready to love him like a woman loves a god. I should have realised this from the very beginning, yet I didn't. I don't know why this is, nor do I wish to analyse it. Dwelling on the past makes us no wiser, and in my opinion is a waste of time. Endymion most certainly loved me too, but he needed to be made aware of it. The following evening, I imbued my rays with a sheen of love that was carnal, with the torrid blaze of intertwined limbs that know no restraint. I was convinced that when my glow would be saturated with passion, my dear Endymion would no longer remain insensible to my approaches. However, on that night, the tangled mass of hair with the tiny shrew's head and black eyes appeared. I should have suspected it. In retrospect, it's surprising that she didn't show up even earlier. She didn't slink up to him, but shamelessly advanced head in. My darling Endymion bounded off of his lonely boulder, shaking off the stupor of the previous evenings. There were no salutation, no words of greeting passed their lips. They didn't rush, rather walked unhurriedly up to each other. Hands began to stroke, first mechanically, and then with greater and greater abandon, groping all parts of their bodies. There were no bushes and trees to obstruct my view. I forced myself to watch as he stripped her of her meagre dress and ferociously took her, first once, and then a second time. They howled like jackals. Even my prince could not overcome the animal allure of the tangled mass of hair with black eyes. She yanked him, scratched him, pulled at his mane, and I could only witness it silently, impotently. I felt like a manacled bystander. I would gouge those shrewish eyes, rip that matted hair of hers to shreds, and take total possession of my beloved. As a goddess, I know how to assume corporeal form, but once I did, I now questioned my ability to win over my Endymion. Even had I appeared before him in broad daylight, could I overcome the baser instincts that imprisoned him? I had my doubts, but was unwilling to fail. I knew of only one way to ensure my success. In desperation, I turned to Zeus, lord of all the gods. He is supreme and omnipotent, but not above meddling in the affairs of men, especially when a goddess is involved. He would avail his almighty power and help me win my loved one. Also, Zeus has the amorous experience that I sorely lack. I was convinced he would furnish the best of all possible solutions. It would be humiliating, since I was certain he would mock me for what I was requesting, as if I were no better than the other raunchy gods and had stooped to their level. However, I would humble myself. My supreme lord, I said, bowing to Zeus the next day, speaking in my most self-effacing tone. Ah, Selene, what brings you to us today, my child? You have absented yourself for too long. We barely see you at Olympus. I bit my lip. I need your help, my lord. You know I'm fond of you, Selene, and would deprive you of nothing. How might I comfort you?
Sir, it began thus. And matter-of-factly, without embellishment, I recounted my tale. At the conclusion, I said in a tone more dramatic than I had intended, "Lord Zeus, grant me your help to win over my Endymion."
All the gods at Olympus have been wondering what has got into you. You have seemed even more aloof than usual. So, you too have succumbed to the charms of the mortals. They can be so fun to toy with. But why squander your time on Earth when you can easily satisfy yourself with more substance here on Olympus?
He leered at me like a satyr, and from that look I imagined he might have designs on me. Such outrages were not unknown. I have no desire to make amorous liaisons amongst the gods, my lord.
But some gods might entertain thoughts about my mistress of the night.
His smile was ever so slight. It confused me, and I couldn't tell whether I was misinterpreting his meaning or not. But I'm faithful to Endymion.
Faithful,
he said, bemused.
What an odd word. Is there some debt you owe this Endymion that he deserves your constancy? What hold can this mortal have upon a goddess?
I shouted in response, surprising even myself. If I can't have Endymion's love, the moon shall no longer shine. Endymion must be mine. His tone lost its conviviality and turned icy.
Comport yourself like the queen of the sky. Don't let your emotions run away with you like some bawling infant. Zeus will harness his unequaled power on your behalf. Believe me, you shall take possession of your shepherd. I vouchsafe it.
Pardon me, great Zeus. Your mercy knows no bounds. I began to doubt if I could ever have Endymion.
Your mistake, Selene, was to try and win him by love. Gods don't need to persuade. They do what they want and take what they want.
But I've never taken anything willfully. His voice became genial again.
You are indeed a precious little robin. You must learn to seize what you covet. Of course I'll help you take possession of that shepherd of yours. There is a minor obstacle which is easily bypassed. Even Zeus can't control a man's heart. This is about the only power mortals retain. I will instruct you how to shine your moonlight tomorrow, and then, when the time comes, I shall simply apply my divine power to sidestep the problem. You do want Endymion to be eternally yours.
As much as I wish to fill the sky night after night.
Good. I shall cast a spell upon him. By the way, I assume it makes no difference what Endymion himself thinks about it?
Not at all, I replied.
A response befitting a true goddess. Leave it all to me and don't discomfort yourself. This incident will come to its proper conclusion.
I bowed with heartfelt appreciation. I had been apprehensive about approaching him, but Zeus will give me what I've been unable to obtain on my own, and I will most gratefully accept it. The next night, a faint wind rustled the leaves of the valley where the campfire had been. The shepherds trudged out wearily to their individual pastures to spend another evening in solitude, watching over their flocks. As the night wore on, each shepherd was puzzled when I didn't rise and the sky remained moonless. They all knew the moon was supposed to be full. Where was the moon hiding? Each one in his own pasture must have wondered on that cloudless night. The matted mass of hair with the black eyes was also waiting for the moon to rise to begin her prowl.
Crouching by a myrtle bush, she anxiously picked the stiff leaves one by one, waiting all evening in dumb anticipation. She could have no inkling that last night's rendezvous would be her last. The shepherds became more and more uneasy as the night passed. All were anxious except my love Endymion. He sat himself in the mouth of a cave and impassively oversaw his sheep in his isolated glen. I rose in my full glory for him that evening. Only he could see me. As I rose higher and higher in the sky, the landscape surrounding him became as light as the day. I saw him fidget as the evening wore on, but I did not preoccupy myself with his thoughts or longings. Just as dawn was set to break, after I had crossed the sky from east to west, I abruptly concealed myself from him. The moonshine was extinguished, and the sky turned as black as the inside of a tomb. My Prince Endymion could no longer see his flock. He could no longer see anything. Extending and waving his arms to make sure he didn't bump into any obstacle, he stumbled out of his cave to get a better sense at what might have caused the abrupt darkness. When Endymion raised his head to the western horizon, to where I should have been, I responded by flashing a sudden burst of light as resplendent as the midday sun directly onto my love. The glare was so bright that surrounding objects blazed out of existence. All he could see was me, fully and totally exposed. My light dazzled him, enveloped him, lifted him up and spun him around in a maelstrom of pure, absolute moonshine. I blinded him. Zeus cast his spell, and he fell unconscious to wake no more. It feels girlish to get so emotional, but I can't help myself. It's like a dream come true. My beloved Endymion lay motionless on the ground. I descended to the earth, scooped him up and took him to a cave which none but I shall ever enter. Let the shepherds and wolf girls look for him as they may, it will be in vain. There he lies, undisturbed and free of all audience except for me, placed oh so gently on a smooth slab of marble. The stone is cold. He doesn't feel it, but I cover him with a downy blanket nonetheless. He sleeps. His chest softly rises and falls, even and beautiful. The sweet whiff of breath flows in and out of his nostrils, ever so slightly, and his face radiates serenity. He shall never die, but will slumber for all eternity. This enchantment was my gift from the Lord Zeus. And every evening, when the moon climbs in the sky, I fly to him, lie down by his side, and rest my head on his chest. My head rises and falls with each of his breaths, and I wrap my arms around him and cry. My tears moisten his soft and unmoving flesh. I have never been so happy.